What are the events or contingencies that maintain the behavior? Well, here we mean what are the things that follow a behavior? What are the things that serve as reinforcers? What are the things that reinforce this behavior so that it continues to occur? We like to say that functional behavior assessment is a process, and as you'll see, it takes a lot of different forms, but it's a way of collecting information and identifying a number of different variables, and usually they relate to the antecedents, or things that happen before a behavior, and the consequences, things that happen after a behavior. Those give us information about the function of a behavior or why it's occurring. They allow us to develop a more effective intervention. That's the whole reason for doing a functional behavior assessment. When I ask folks often who are working in schools, what is the purpose of a functional behavior assessment, or why do you conduct it? The answer I often get is because it's part of law. It's part of IDEA. It's a requirement since 1997 that under certain situations you conduct a functional behavior assessment. They're missing, however, the actual reason. The real reason is it allows you to develop a more effective intervention if you do it correctly. The problem is it often is not done correctly, and we'll discuss that more later. The term functional analysis is used to describe a whole range of procedures. All these procedures are used to uncover the functions or reason a behavior occurs, but there are different ways of going about getting that information. So functional analysis is a smaller subset of that. Read the chapter if you haven't already. It describes functional analysis. We're not going to go through that in as much detail in this course. You'll cover that more when you take 560. But we do want to discuss it a little and describe how to use it. We're going to spend more time talking about other kinds of functional assessment. The types we're going to focus on are indirect functional assessment and direct functional assessment. Indirect functional assessment means that you use things to obtain information about a student's behavior by getting information from an informant. So it's either using a rating scale or an interview or both, some kind of instrument. You either interview a person who spent a lot of time with the student, or you have them fill out some kind of rating scale, and that gives you information. It's called indirect because you're getting the information from someone else. It's secondhand information. Direct functional behavior assessment is when you actually observe a student and collect some kind of observational data on the antecedents and consequences of a behavior. And we'll spend time talking about several different ways of getting direct functional behavior assessment data. So just be aware at this point that functional analysis refers to a whole set of strategies. Within that, there are other types of procedures for gathering data. Functional analysis is more specific. It involves actually changing the environment. So you're actually manipulating things to test out a hypothesis. In the textbook, several of these procedures are described, and I'll just briefly go through a couple of them here. If we had a hypothesis about a student, and let's say that we thought that a student engaged in a behavior in order to get attention, which is one of the kids I've been working with. He has two functions. Some of his behavior is to get attention from the teacher, and some of his behavior is to escape demands, and he does different behaviors for different reasons. So if we were going to test that out, what we would do is we would just decide, okay, in the morning on this day and this day, we're going to give this kid attention every time he does this behavior. So the kid does the behavior, and then we might give him like a reprimand. We might go up and say, you know, that's not appropriate behavior for this classroom. You have to stop that immediately. That's kind of negative attention, but it's a form of attention. A lot of kids will engage in behavior just to get that kind of reaction from a teacher. So other days, we may just give attention to a different student instead. So when this kid does a behavior, instead of directly responding to that kid, we'll go to another kid and say, you're doing a great job. I like the way you're following directions. So what we would do then is we would measure the behavior in both of those situations, and we would look over time, does the behavior happen more when we give the student attention after the behavior, or does it happen just as often when we don't follow the behavior with attention? So that's a real simple kind of functional analysis. You're actually manipulating the environment. Another way to do it is if you believe a student is engaging in behavior to escape a demand, you could alternate preferred and non-preferred tasks in some planned way, and you could measure the student's behavior under each of those situations. What you're looking for is, does the student engage in problem behavior more when there are non-preferred kinds of tasks? And the idea is that the student's trying to escape those more. That's another way to manipulate things. As a teacher, and what actually I find professionally is that I rely more on just observing naturally occurring behaviors. And that's my bias. I think that it's very difficult to do manipulations in school. There's a lot of work involved. It's very labor intensive and time consuming, and there are another number of reasons why it's not used very much in school. So most of the time what we're going to actually be using is direct observation of a behavior without systematically manipulating things to test them out. But I have used those in some situations when behavior's been very hard to figure out. Whenever you do a functional behavior assessment, it's important that you also do a very thorough background investigation to make sure that there is not something else going on. For example, are there any medical conditions or problems that might be related to the student's behavior problems? Does the student have allergies? I've worked with kids with cognitive disabilities who periodically would have self-injurious behavior. Sometimes it's due to otitis media. So kids have a middle ear infection, have a lot of pain, but they don't have a way of telling someone they're hurting, so they just hit themselves in the head, and there are different theories about that. One theory is that by hitting yourself, you're masking the pain that you might have with a very painful ear infection. I've worked with kids who had a lot more behavior problems during certain times of the year when their allergies were bothering them. Also, you could be working with kids with mental health issues. If a student had bipolar disorder, for example, that is a chemical imbalance that will result in changes in someone's mood that can affect their behavior. There are a number of other kinds of medical conditions or mental health issues that could be associated with changes in a student's behavior. You want to be sure that you've ruled those out, or you're at least addressing those at the same time. So these are usually done about the same time. We just covered the material on antecedent strategies and proactive strategies. You want to be sure that the classroom environment is set up properly. Have the expectations been made really clear? Is the student aware of those? Have they been taught to the student? Also, does the pattern of the curriculum match the student's needs? In other words, is the instruction level way over the student's abilities? Are there enough supports in place to ensure the student's going to be successful? Does the student have opportunities to do things that he or she likes to do? Is there adequate leisure time? Does the student know how to use free time appropriately? In other words, you want to take a look at the overall environment, and does it appear to be meeting the needs of the student? If it is not, those are things that need to be addressed before you get into more intensive individual behavior programs. You fix those things first. Slides there. Here we go. Do the staff who work with the student have the kind of training they need? In other words, do they know how to use reinforcement and positive praise? Do they know how to do all that good stuff that we talked about in the proactive strategies? Do they know how to do the kinds of interventions that were discussed in those 4 articles that you read? Functional behavior assessment has been described as, and I believe that it is, a respectful process. In other words, you acknowledge that behaviors, even though they may be difficult behaviors or challenging behaviors, they happen for a reason. They are functional for that person. So when we design an intervention, we want to first have an understanding about why this behavior is occurring. And the real question is, what are we going to give the student to use instead of this problem behavior? If you want to see long-term change in behavior, trust me, it is not going to occur unless you teach that person another way to get his or her needs met. You can get temporary changes in behavior that are really dependent on someone else implementing something, but if you want to see long-term changes, the kind of changes that influence someone's life, you need to teach alternative behaviors. In order to do that, you need to understand why a behavior is occurring. In the previous section or previous unit, we discussed proactive strategies and interventions that should be implemented on a class-wide basis. When we get to the point of developing individualized interventions, we want to look at more specific things. What are the specific things this person needs in the environment to be successful? Does the student need more structure? Does the student need more predictability or more cues about changes that might happen? Does the student need more structure or more scaffolding and instructional strategies? Does the student need more intensive kinds of instruction or more frequent reinforcement and feedback? So what are the things that we've learned the student needs, and then how can we put those things in the environment so that it's going to facilitate the success of our student?